She called her trash. Right there, out loud, in the middle of a packed five-star Manhattan restaurant, in front of 100 people who had paid four figures for the privilege of dining in silence. She spelled it out, letter by letter, like she wanted to make sure it was understood. T-R-A-S-H. And the woman she said it to? She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She just looked back with the calm, unreadable expression of someone who already knows how this ends. Because she did know. She built the room they were both standing in, and tonight the reckoning was already in motion. The restaurant was called Reverie, and it deserved the name. Tucked into the ground floor of a converted brownstone on the Upper West Side, it had the kind of atmosphere that made you feel like you were dining inside a secret. The soft click of expensive heels on hardwood, the murmur of conversations conducted at a volume that suggested everything important was left unsaid. The lighting was low and amber, warm enough to make everyone look like a painting. Crystal glasses on every table caught the light and scattered it like small, contained miracles. This was not just a restaurant, it was a statement. And tonight, for the woman tightening the straps on a cheap polyester apron, it was a problem. Her name badge said Claire, but her name was not Claire. Her name was Avery Callahan, and for the last 3 evenings she had been someone else entirely. Avery, who was 32 years old and had not worn a name badge since she was 22, stood in the staff corridor and adjusted the scratchy apron over her plain black uniform. Her copper-red hair, usually styled in a sharp, confident cut, was scraped back into a utilitarian bun and pinned with the kind of drugstore bobby pins you find at the bottom of a bathroom drawer. No jewelry, no makeup. Her hands, usually wearing the single understated gold band she'd bought herself the day she signed the deed on her first restaurant, were bare and slightly raw from industrial sanitizing solution. For 3 nights, Avery Callahan had been invisible, and that was, with calculated precision, entirely the point. Avery Callahan was not a waitress. She was the founder, the owner, and the engine behind the entire Callahan Hospitality Group, a 12-restaurant operation that had made her one of Food and Wine magazine's most consequential voices in American dining before she turned 30. Reverie was her flagship, her masterpiece, the one she'd poured the most money, the most care, and the most of herself into. Which is precisely why, 2 months ago, when the numbers started lying, she felt it like a splinter under a fingernail. Food costs were up 18%. Staff turnover had reached 40% in 8 months. Customer complaints, not about the food, but about the experience, the intangible atmosphere of warmth that had always been Reverie's signature, had quietly tripled. Her CFO, Daniel Park, had recommended a formal corporate audit. Her COO, Marcus Webb, had suggested bringing in a hospitality consultant. Avery had considered both options and chosen a third: go in herself. She had worked the floor herself for 6 years before she could afford to step away from it. She knew the difference between a dining room that was managed and one that was led. And the man supposedly leading Reverie, the general manager, one Daniel Hartley, was, in Avery's careful 3-night assessment, doing neither. Daniel Hartley was, in appearance, impeccable. Suit pressed to a knife's edge, hair neat, smile deployed at arrival like a weapon. He moved through the dining room with the easy authority of someone who has learned to perform management without actually practicing it. But Avery had watched him, and what she saw was the picture of a man who had made himself comfortable at the expense of everyone around him. He hadn't cleared a single table, hadn't run a plate to a kitchen pass, hadn't stepped in when a table of rowdy finance types began making increasingly pointed and inappropriate comments to Jessica, the senior server, about her wine recommendations. He had stood near the bar, straightened his cuffs, and pretended not to notice. What Avery had noticed instead were the people Daniel Hartley had apparently never seen at all. There was Liam, the 19-year-old busboy who had been clearing tables in a continuous, graceful sprint all evening, his shirt damp at the back, moving with the focused energy of someone who genuinely cared about the outcome. There was Sarah, the hostess, barely 21, who had been managing a double shift all week because Hartley had refused to approve overtime to cover a scheduling gap he had created by overbooking the room to impress a restaurant critic who never showed up. And there was Jessica, the senior server, trained sommelier, 8 years in fine dining, the woman who had, in Avery's watching, been quietly doing the work of a floor manager while carrying a server's title and drawing a server's salary. These were not the signatures of poor restaurant, they were the signatures of a broken one, broken from the top by a man who had confused the appearance of authority with its substance. She arrived at 8:47. Avery was topping off water at table 7 when she felt it, not heard it, felt it, the almost imperceptible shift in the room's atmospheric pressure that announces the arrival of someone who has spent their entire life demanding the world rearrange itself around them. The woman who walked through the door of reverie that night was not simply wealthy. Wealth, Avery knew, was neutral. It was a resource, like water. What this woman wielded was something else. Wealth as a verdict, wealth as a sentence, wealth as proof that the rules governing ordinary people did not and should not apply to her. Her name was Victoria Ashworth. She swept through the door flanked by 2 women, Penelope and Diane, who wore her aesthetic like a matching set and possessed roughly a third of her confidence. Victoria herself was in a black designer coat that she shrugged off onto Sarah, the hostess, without making eye contact or breaking her stride, the way you drape a coat over a piece of furniture. Underneath, a deep crimson dress, a wrist stacked with gold bracelets that announced themselves with every movement, and in the crook of her arm, white and pristine and enormous, a Birkin bag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She looked around the restaurant with the unhurried survey of someone who had already decided to be disappointed. "We have a reservation," Victoria announced, her voice the kind of effortlessly carrying alto that doesn't need to be raised to command a room. "Ashworth, party of 3. Sarah pulled up the reservation and smiled, the real kind, the kind she'd been trained to give. "Of course, Mrs. Ashworth, right this way." But Victoria wasn't moving toward the table Sarah was gesturing to. Her eyes had already found the one she wanted, the showpiece, the semicircular booth by the window, upholstered in deep velvet, overlooking the park. A table that tonight had a small reserved card on it and the name Thompson in Sarah's careful handwriting. "We want that one," Victoria said, pointing. Sarah faltered. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Ashworth. That table is reserved for Mr. Thompson. He's been a regular here for several years, and he specifically—" "I am Victoria Ashworth," she interrupted, with the calm certainty of someone reading a law of physics. "My husband is Jeffrey Ashworth, of Ashworth Capital. Do you have any idea what that means?" She paused, one manicured finger extended toward the reserved table. "Move us there, or I'll have your job before you've clocked out." Avery watched from across the room, pitcher still in hand. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Not the confrontation itself, that was almost beside the point. What she was measuring was the response. A good manager, a real one, handles a moment like this with grace and steel in equal measure. You honor the reservation, you protect your staff, you find a way to make everyone feel respected. What Daniel Hartley did was none of those things. He appeared at Victoria's side within 30 seconds of being flagged down, beaming a smile that had never once reached his eyes. "Mrs. Ashworth, a pleasure, as always." A single withering look at Sarah. Why is Mrs. Ashworth still standing? And then, turning to Sarah, moved the Thompson reservation to table 12. Sarah's face went pale. "But sir, table 12 is directly beside the kitchen pass, the noise from service." "Now, Sarah," he said quietly, his voice dropping to a register that was not a whisper but functioned as one, a sound designed only for the person it was meant to wound. He turned back to Victoria, the smile fully restored. "Right this way. My apologies for any confusion." Avery felt a cold, clean anger settle somewhere beneath her sternum. Harrison hadn't just failed a test. He had, in the space of 90 seconds, thrown a loyal regular under the bus, publicly humiliated a hostess doing her job correctly, and bowed to the kind of behavior that corrodes a staff from within. The rot, she now understood, was systemic. As fate, or perhaps as consequence, arranged it, Hartley seated Victoria's party in the section where Avery was training under Jessica's supervision. "Jessica will be your primary server this evening," Hartley said smoothly, then added with a pointed glance at Avery, "and Claire here is new, so do be patient." Victoria sized Avery up the way you might glance at a crack in the ceiling, noting it, filing it under problems, and moving on. "A trainee," she said, to no one in particular. "Wonderful." She snapped her fingers, not at the table, at Avery, a sharp single crack, the gesture a person might make for a dog. "Sparkling water, Italian, and try not to trip." It went on like that. The Italian sparkling water was declared flat, then, after being replaced with a freshly opened bottle, the hiss of carbonation clearly audible to the entire table, simply dismissed with a wave. The bread service was too warm. The amuse-bouche was too small for the price point. Each minor grievance was delivered not to the server, but to her companions, in a voice pitched just loud enough to ensure the surrounding tables could absorb it. "The service here has simply fallen apart," she announced, examining her water glass against the light. "It's what happens when you let anyone in off the street." Avery's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She was gathering data. Every dismissal, every casual slight, every moment of weaponized condescension was noted and filed. The pattern was clear. Daniel Hartley's sycophancy had created a protected space in which a woman like Victoria Ashworth could behave without consequence. That was about to change.
The wine incident was something else. Victoria ordered a bottle from the upper tier of the list, a 2019 California Cabernet at $480. Jessica presented it, uncorked it, and poured a tasting measure with the unhurried precision of someone who had been doing this for nearly a decade. Victoria swirled, sniffed, tasted, her face soured. "It's corked," she declared, pushing the glass aside. Jessica, without so much as a flicker of visible reaction, poured a small measure into a fresh glass and tasted it professionally. Her expression remained neutral. "Mrs. Ashworth, I'm not detecting any TCA or oxidation. The wine seems to be in excellent condition." Victoria set down her glass with a small, sharp click. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I'm offering my professional assessment," Jessica said evenly. "You're telling a customer they're wrong," Victoria said, her voice rising just enough to carry. "Get me the manager." Hartley arrived. He did not taste the wine. He did not consult Jessica. He looked at Victoria, then at the bottle, then at Jessica, and made his calculation in under 2 seconds. "Another bottle on the house, Mrs. Ashworth. My apologies." He turned to Jessica. "A word, in the back, now." Jessica walked with her head up and her hands at her sides, and Avery watched her go and felt the anger inside her sharpen to something precise. The main course arrived, carried by a nervous food runner who deposited the plates and retreated with the careful speed of someone who has learned that proximity to this table carries a cost. Victoria stared at her scallops, gold-encrusted, arranged on saffron risotto with a precision that represented hours of kitchen craft, with the expression of a woman who had already decided what she thought. And then she did something that Avery would remember for the rest of her career. Slowly, deliberately, with the practiced nonchalance of someone who had done this before, Victoria reached up, plucked a single long blonde hair from her own shoulder, and draped it across the top of the scallops. Then she gasped. "Oh my God!" she breathed, the theatricality of it almost impressive in its lack of shame. "A hair!" She shoved the plate across the table hard enough that the risotto splashed onto the tablecloth. She stood up, and she pointed her finger directly at Avery's face. "You!
Victoria said. Her voice had left the register of complaint and entered something harder, something that had been waiting all evening for a target large enough to justify it. "You did this! You put that hair on my plate!" "Ma'am," Avery said, her voice very quiet, very steady, "I was 5 feet away from your table. I didn't go near it. Don't you dare lie to me." "I'm not lying. Your companion knocked a water glass over earlier, and the security cameras—" "The cameras?" Victoria's voice cracked into something jagged. "You arrogant little— You're going to accuse me? You're going to accuse me and my friends?" The room had gone completely still. The ambient jazz from the speakers had not stopped, but no one in the restaurant could hear it anymore. There was only Victoria Ashworth's voice, rising and rising, and Avery's face, completely still, watching, waiting. "You are the most incompetent, disgusting excuse for a person I have ever encountered," Victoria said, and her voice had arrived now at the place she'd been building to all evening, cold, absolute, intended to wound. "You are trash. Trash. People like you shouldn't even be allowed to breathe the same air as me. You are nothing. My driver has a better life than you'll ever have. You are a pathetic, low-life waitress, and that is all you will ever be." The silence that followed was complete. Somewhere in the kitchen, through 50 feet of wall and door, a timer ticked. Avery didn't flinch. She didn't drop her gaze. She just looked at Victoria Ashworth with an expression that contained no anger, no hurt, and no fear. Only the cool, patient stillness of someone who is about to finish something.
"I saw you put that hair on the plate," Avery said. Her voice was unchanged, the same quiet, even timbre she'd maintained all evening. But something in it had shifted. The meekness was gone. What remained was something far more expansive. Victoria's face contorted. "Mr. Hartley," she snapped, "get over here. I want this person removed from this building." Daniel Hartley came running. He looked at the table. He looked at Avery. He saw his entire professionally comfortable arrangement, the comp meals, the special treatment, the carefully maintained relationship with a woman who could, he believed, either recommend reverie to her social circle or destroy it. All of it balanced on the edge of a cliff. He made the only choice a man of his particular character could make. "Claire," he said, his voice cracking, "that is enough. You're fired. Get your things and get out of my restaurant." Victoria smiled, slow and certain and deeply satisfied. "That's right. Go back to wherever you crawled out of." Avery looked at Daniel Hartley. Her head was tilted very slightly. "Fired?" she said. The word was almost reflective. "Are you absolutely certain about that, Daniel?" "Yes," he said, puffing up. "You're done. Security can escort you." "I'd wait on that call," Avery said, and the woman called Claire disappeared. It happened in a single breath. Her posture changed. Her chin lifted. The subservient set of her shoulders resolved into something else, something that filled the space around her differently, the way a figure steps out of a shadow and becomes suddenly completely visible. She reached up and unpinned the name badge. She dropped it on the table. "My name is Avery Callahan," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of the silent room as if it had been designed to do exactly that. "I am the founder and owner of Reverie, and this," she gestured slowly at the beautiful, broken room around her, "is my company." The silence that followed Avery's words was not just an absence of sound, it was a physical presence, a pressure in the room that made it feel as though the walls had moved an inch closer. Daniel Hartley's face had become unrecognizable. The blood had left it entirely, leaving something pale and collapsed, like a building with the load-bearing wall removed. His mouth was moving, but producing nothing. The pure cognitive failure of a man whose entire architecture of assumption had just been demolished in a single sentence. And then the heavy front door opened, and Marcus Webb walked in. Avery's COO, the public face of Callahan Hospitality, flanked by 2 members of their security team in dark suits. He scanned the room, found Avery, and walked toward her with the unhurried, purposeful stride of a man with the board's authority and a lawyer's precision. Marcus looked at Hartley. He looked at Victoria.
He looked at Avery, not with surprise because Marcus had been briefed 2 hours ago, but with a controlled, professional fury that was, in its quiet way, far more frightening than noise. "Mr. Hartley," he said, "we've been looking at your numbers for 6 weeks. The food costs, the liquor costs, the F&B spend against reported revenue." He produced his phone and scrolled without hurry. "Your predecessor's managerial comp budget, the fund used for the occasional complimentary dessert, the recovered kitchen mistake, the anniversary surprise, averaged $1,400 a month. Yours has averaged $11,000 a month." Hartley made a sound. Marcus continued, "You've been logging it as VIP marketing or guest recovery."
The problem, Daniel, is that we approved that budget line, and we haven't seen a single report in 8 months. He glanced at Victoria, his tone remaining entirely conversational. "Mrs. Ashworth, your last 4 dinners here appear in our system under guest recovery. The total comes to $4,210, which is interesting because our records also show that you submitted a complaint on each of those visits, almost as if the complaints were the mechanism." Victoria's jaw tightened. The crimson of her dress had seemed 20 minutes ago like power. Now it looked like a target. The full accounting took 9 minutes. Hartley's total unauthorized comp expenditure over 8 months, once Marcus had finished reading from the financial summary Avery had spent 2 weeks compiling with her CFO, came to $26,000. Meals for friends, logged as client recovery, liquor costs that had been quietly rerouted, a pattern of manipulation so confident in its concealment that Hartley had apparently never considered that the owner might one day put on an apron and come see for herself. "Your employment with the Callahan Hospitality Group is terminated," Marcus said, "effective immediately for gross misconduct, willful mismanagement, and felony theft. Our legal team will contact you at home tomorrow morning regarding a restitution arrangement. If you are not fully cooperative, we will be filing a formal complaint with the NYPD by noon." The 2 security personnel stepped forward. They didn't touch Hartley roughly. They simply took him, one on each arm, and lifted him to his feet with the professional neutrality of people who have performed this service before and will perform it again. And then the walk began. From the center of the dining room, past the bar, where the bartenders he had screamed at that morning for using the wrong glassware set down their polishing cloths and watched him with cold, crossed arms, past Sarah at the hostess stand, who held her head up and did not look away even as he could not meet her eyes, past Jessica at the service station, and there, for one moment, their eyes met. In hers he found no anger, no triumph, only the quiet, deep relief of someone who has been believed, finally, after a very long time of not being. The kitchen doors swung open as they passed through, and the entire line was there. White coats under harsh fluorescent lights, arms folded, silent witnesses to his departure through the service entrance and into the indifferent dark of the New York alley.
Every eye in the room returned to Victoria Ashworth. She was standing at her table, alone now. Penelope and Diane still in their chairs, but motionless, wine glasses frozen halfway to their lips. The phones had come up. Not all at once, gradually, the way dawn comes. First 1 table, then 3, then a dozen, 100 people, all recording. Victoria's eyes moved around the room and took this in, and something changed in her face. The contemptuous certainty began to crack. "This is a setup," she said, but her voice had thinned. "This is some kind of absurd performance. I'll have my lawyers—" "Mrs. Ashworth," Marcus said, his tone the pleasant neutrality of someone discussing business. "Your husband, Jeffrey, he's the one who's been sending my office correspondence for the past 3 months, isn't he? Trying to arrange a meeting about the Ashworth Capital Development bid." The blood left Victoria's face with the speed of a tide going out. "The proposal for the South End mixed-use project," Marcus continued. "Our development arm is in the final selection process, 3 firms in the running." He paused. "We are, as I'm sure you can imagine, very particular about the values of our partners. Our brand is built on integrity." He glanced at the sea of recording phones. I imagine the board at Ashworth Capital will have questions for Jeffrey about why an evening at a restaurant has become a significant brand liability. The high-definition footage of tonight's events will likely reach them before he finishes his morning coffee. Tiffany moved first. She put her wine glass down with a precision that said, "I have made a calculation, and it is complete." She stood, smoothed her dress, and picked up her handbag with the deliberate composure of someone engineering a controlled separation. "You're on your own, Maddie," she said, and her voice was not cruel. It was something worse, perfectly indifferent. "You always do this, and I'm just done." She walked past Avery and Marcus, paused, and offered them a small, composed nod, the social mathematics of it transparent to everyone watching. "I was merely adjacent to this. Please note the distinction." And then she was gone. Diane was already on her feet, bag clutched to her chest. "My babysitter! The babies! I have to—" She didn't finish the sentence. She was out the door before the words left her. Victoria Ashworth stood alone in the middle of reverie, surrounded by 100 people, encircled by 100 recording phones, abandoned by her friends, her composure in pieces on the hardwood floor. The tears came, and they were not the soft kind. They were the red-faced, gasping tears of a woman who has never in her life been the smallest person in a room and has suddenly, catastrophically discovered what that feels like. "You'll all be hearing from my lawyers," she managed, her voice a fractured thing. "This is harassment. This is slander. This is—" She grabbed your bag from the chair. The movement was so jerky, so outside her usual practiced fluidity, that she knocked the chair over. It hit the floor with a crack that rang through the silent room like a period at the end of a very long sentence. She turned to leave. "Mrs. Ashworth," Avery's voice, quiet and even, stopped her. She turned back, mascara tracking down her face, and looked at the woman she had called trash. Avery walked calmly to the POS terminal at the service station, tapped a few buttons, and tore the printed receipt from the machine with a quiet zip. She walked back and held it out. "You forgot to pay your bill." "We've removed Mr. Hartley's unauthorized comped charges, of course," Avery said pleasantly, "but the items you actually consumed remain on the bill. 1 bottle of San Pellegrino, 2 glasses of Veuve Clicquot for your companions, a shared appetizer, and the $480 bottle of Napa Cabernet, the one you declared corked and then proceeded to drink a glass and a half of before your epiphany." She held the receipt out steadily. "The total, with New York City tax, comes to $644. Victoria made a sound that belonged to no recognizable human register. "Send it to my husband. He'll deal with it." "Oh, we will," said Marcus, stepping forward and taking the receipt from Avery's hand. He folded it and slipped it into his inside jacket pocket with the care of someone filing an important document. "We'll have a full, itemized statement messengered to his office first thing in the morning, along with a detailed incident report from our legal team and a copy of the security footage, of course. We'll make sure he receives the high-definition angle." Victoria made one more sound. It was the sound of something that had, until tonight, considered itself unbreakable. She turned, stumbled for the door, pushed when she should have pulled, and stood there, the most expensive, the most powerful, the most untouchable woman in the room, unable to operate a door handle. Liam, the 19-year-old busboy who had been quietly running his section all evening without pause or complaint, stepped forward and pulled it open for her. His expression was one of perfect professional neutrality. And in that silence, that neutral face was the most devastating thing that had happened all night. Victoria Ashworth stumbled through into the indifferent dark. The heavy oak door swung shut behind her with a final, resonant thud. For 10 seconds, the restaurant was completely still. Then Avery let out the long, slow breath she felt she'd been holding for 3 days and turned, not to the room, not to the phones, not to Marcus, but to her staff. She walked to the hostess stand and put her hand on Sarah's shoulder. The young woman was trembling. "Are you okay?" Avery asked, her voice soft and entirely different from any register she'd used all evening. No authority in it, no performance, just a person asking another person a real question. Sarah nodded. Tears slipped down her face. "He was like that every day," she whispered. "Every single day." "I know," Avery said. "I'm sorry it took me this long. He's gone." She moved on, across the floor, to the service station, where Jessica stood rooted, her hands clasped, white-knuckled in front of her. "Jessica," Avery said, "I watched you tonight. I watched you handle a difficult table with grace and expertise. I watched you de-escalate a genuinely unpleasant situation with the finance group at table 2. And I watched you stand your ground, professionally and correctly, about that Cabernet, even when you knew it would cost you, even when that woman was calling you a liar in front of a full dining room." Jessica's lip trembled. "I was just doing my job." "You were doing his job," Avery said, glancing toward the now empty back office. "You've been doing his job for months, haven't you?" A pause, then a single precise nod. "Effective immediately," Avery said. "You are the acting general manager of Reverie. Full salary, full bonus structure, my complete support. Marcus will be here in the morning with the paperwork." Jessica's hands flew to her mouth. The tears came freely now, the kind that cannot be managed. "Yes," she said barely audibly. "Yes. Oh my God, thank you." "Don't thank me," Avery said. "You earned it." Avery straightened and looked at the room. The 100 patrons of Reverie were all watching, some still holding their phones, most not. She clapped her hands together once, a single sharp sound that brought every eye to her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, and her voice was easy now, warm and resonant without effort. "My sincere apologies for the interruption to your evening. My name is Avery Callahan, and I am the owner of this restaurant. As you've just witnessed, we had a serious management issue, one I am happy to tell you has been permanently resolved." A few people laughed. Someone started to clap. It spread. "My team," she said, gesturing broadly to the servers, the bartenders, the busboys standing at attention around the edges of the room, "are the finest, most dedicated people in this city. They deserve your respect, and I can promise you they will always have mine." She raised her voice slightly. "As a thank you for your extraordinary patience during our unscheduled corporate restructuring, all drinks for every table for the remainder of your evening are on the house." The room didn't politely applaud, it erupted, genuine, full-throated, the sound of 100 people who'd come in for dinner and left with a story they'd tell for the rest of their lives. She found Liam near the service bar. He snapped to attention. "Liam," she said, "I watched you tonight. You were clearing 3 tables at once while the rest of this was happening. You've got something that can't be taught. See Jessica tomorrow morning. We're training you as a server. It's a significant pay raise. You've earned it." Liam's face split into a grin so wide and unguarded it looked like something from a different decade. She turned to the gathered staff. "I am so sorry I had to deceive you," she said, quietly enough now that only they could hear. "I came here to find a problem, and I had to be certain. What I found was a team working under impossible conditions with a coward for a leader. And you still delivered, every shift, every night." She unpinned the name badge that said Claire and slipped it into her apron pocket. Not the apron itself, though. She left it on. She spotted the water pitcher on the service bar. She picked it up. "Now," she said, and smiled at her staff, the real smile, the one that transformed her face entirely, the one that nobody who'd met Sophie or Claire had ever seen. "Let's show them what real hospitality looks like." She turned and walked back out onto the floor. Table 11 was waiting. Avery Callahan walked into Reverie that night as a woman without limits. She walked out without her friends, without her composure, without the cover of anonymity, and without a table she would ever sit at again. The bill she refused to hold would be waiting on her husband's desk in the morning, alongside 20 minutes of high-definition video and a legal summary that used words like fraud and intent. And the woman she had pointed at and called trash, the woman she had told in front of 100 witnesses would never be anything more than she was, that woman would wake up the next morning and return to the work of running 12 restaurants, preparing to open a 13th, and remembering that the most dangerous thing you can do to a person who built something from nothing is to assume you can see the whole of them from where you're standing. Avery Callahan had worked a server's floor for 6 years to fund her dream. She had washed dishes and carried trays and smined through 100 Victoria Ashworths before she had the power to do anything about any of them. And when she finally did, when she stood in the center of her own restaurant on a Tuesday evening in October with a water pitcher in her hand and the whole room watching, she did not choose humiliation. She chose clarity. She called out what needed to be called out. She restored what needed to be restored. She promoted who needed to be promoted, and then she went back to work. Some people are born into rooms that tell them they belong. Some people build the room themselves. The difference in the end is not about the room, it's about who you are when no one knows your name.
For more videos, please subscribe, like, and comment.